How to work pressure gauge, temperature gauge and flow switch. A pressure gauge, temperature gauge, and flow switch are all instruments used in various applications to monitor and control different parameters. Here's a general overview of how each of these instruments works. Pressure gauge. A pressure gauge is used to measure the pressure of a fluid or gas within a system. It consists of a dial or digital display with a needle or numerical readout that indicates the pressure value. The basic working principle of a pressure gauge involves the use of a pressure sensing element, such as a Bourdon tube or diaphragm, which deforms in response to the applied pressure. This deformation is then translated into a reading on the gauge display. To use a pressure gauge, you typically connect it to the system you want to measure by attaching it to a pressure port or tapping. When the fluid or gas enters the gauge, it exerts a force on the sensing element, causing it to deform and provide a corresponding pressure reading on the gauge. Temperature gauge. A temperature gauge is used to measure the temperature of a medium, such as a liquid or gas. There are various types of temperature gauges, including bimetallic, liquid-filled, gas-filled, and digital thermometers. In a bimetallic temperature gauge, two different metals with different coefficients of thermal expansion are bonded together. As the temperature changes, the metals expand or contract at different rates, causing the bonded strip to bend. This bending motion is converted into a temperature reading on the gauge. Liquid-filled temperature gauges contain a temperature sensing element, such as a bulb or capillary, filled with a temperature-sensitive liquid. As the temperature changes, the liquid expands or contracts, causing the pressure in the gauge to change, which is then displayed on the gauge. Digital temperature gauges use temperature sensors, such as thermocouples or resistance temperature detectors, RTDS, to measure temperature. These sensors provide electrical signals that are converted into temperature readings and displayed on a digital screen. Flow switch. A flow switch is used to monitor the flow rate of a liquid or gas within a system, and is typically used to trigger an action based on whether the flow is above or below a certain threshold. The flow switch contains a flow sensing element, such as a paddle, vane, or thermal sensor, which is placed in the path of the fluid flow. When the fluid flow reaches a certain rate, it activates the flow sensing element, which then triggers a switch or an electrical signal. This signal can be used to control other devices or send an alert indicating the flow status. To install a flow switch, you usually need to place it in the pipeline or duct where you want to monitor the flow. The switch should be positioned in such a way that the flow of fluid or gas can impact the sensing element appropriately to trigger the desired response.